Assalamu alaikum. I am really delighted and honoured to be speaking with you all today. Thank you to all the organisers, especially Dr. Reem, for giving me this opportunity. I can feel the energy from the conference, even though I'm sat here in my study here in cold, rainy England. I'm going to talk today about cyber power. It's a really fascinating global trend, and it's one that no matter what industry you work in, it's worth understanding. Building cyber power is something that involves a whole nation. It's about skilling up more people, having strong defences in the industries, strong capabilities in the intelligence agencies, and strong capabilities within the military as well. And I wanted to share with you some thinking I've been doing around military organisations and what their strategy should be to stay ahead in this arms race for cyber power. Now, you might be wondering why, given I guess most of you probably aren't in industry, why cover this topic? Well, it's because I think that military organisations are going to need the help and expertise from commercial sectors. They are not generally familiar with that really fast changing technical environment where a cyber defense or an offensive capability, so cyber weapon, can become useless overnight just because of a technology change or because of what attackers are doing. And in the commercial world, however, we've been we're very familiar with just how rapid technical change can be and the impact that can have upon us in cybersecurity. And so it's bringing some of that expertise back in. The other reason I think it's worth everyone being aware is that it is a national debate on what good cyber power looks like, and the more that we engage with the wider community on helping to influence that, the better the outcome that I think we will all have. So what have we seen from other countries then? And remember, this is an arms race, so seeing multiple friendly countries overtly grow their capability, their cyber power, is an indication that less friendly countries are also picking up their capability, even though they might not be quite as open about it as we are. So in the UK, the media has reported that a joint cyber force is being created between UK police, the military, and GCHQ, which is the intelligence organisation within the UK. And that will quadruple the manpower assigned to offensive cyber. It's aimed at targeting rogue nations, extremist groups, people traffickers, as well as paedophile rings. And what's also interesting is the head of GCHQ, so the intelligence organisation in the UK, gave a public speech in Singapore last year advocating this idea of cyber power. And he set out 3 key characteristics essential to achieving that cyber power, or in other words, to win in that cyber arms race. Those 3 things were strong cyber defences, having a clear license to operate, so strong legal, ethical, regulatory regimes, and thirdly, an offensive capability. If you look at France, the French Minister of Defence declared that military superiority could not be achieved without superiority in cyberspace, and that cyber weapons were just now parts of France's military capabilities alongside conventional and nuclear weapons. And she said that cyber warfare has begun and France must be ready to fight it. So quite a clear indication of intent there from France. For the US, they've put substantial funding towards this area and are generally seen as world leaders in cyber power. The US Defense Secretary cited that cyber is an essential part of the battle space. He said, just as we do on land, at sea and in the air, we must posture our forces in cyberspace where we can most effectively accomplish our mission. Notably, I haven't called out Israel, China or Russia. It is well known that they do have significant cyber power. They don't necessarily frame it in the same way that Western countries do, but they're definitely aiming to dominate in that space as well. So a significant number of nations are moving significant funding towards developing cyber power, and with that, both the defensive and offensive capability in their militaries and intelligence agencies. So we are going to operate in an ever more contested cyber environment. I don't think that's debatable. Within 10 years, it's reasonable to assume that for developed nations, we'll have moved on significantly in our use of offensive cyber. It will just be part of weapon systems on mobile platforms and autonomous platforms. We'll be much more comfortable with deception techniques, so hackback, and how that will be part of the defences. Obviously within the military, not within a commercial space. I wouldn't expect to see hackback within a commercial space. And having that part of their defences. And then just another part of intelligence gathering capability within military and intelligence agencies. We've also got to be conscious that offensive cyber will be a powerful enabler for deception and misinformation. And actually, I think we can expect misinformation to become more prolific from some nations to achieve political aim. So factors like climate change, driving global migration, they're going to create strong opportunities for creating unrest with some targeted misinformation. So for the rest of the talk, when I talk about cyber warfare, offensive or defensive cyber, I include deception and the use of cyber capabilities to deliver misinformation very much as part of that. We mustn't forget, though, that it's not just developed nations that will take advantage of cyber in warfare. Less developed nations, non-state groups, terrorist groups, will find it very attractive because compared to large platforms like aircraft, ships, tanks, it's really quite cheap and there are really low barriers to entry for them. For CNI in particular, I think, so critical national infrastructure, we can expect an uptick in cyber activities. And one thing to be very aware of, it's not just in warfare that we'd expect these offensive cyber operations to be seen. So it'll be very much in what's called the grey zone. So where there's tensions between nations, you're not in overt warfare, but you're not really getting on with each other. And when you're in this grey zone, you can expect nation states to do what's called pre-positioning. So to position on another country's networks so that should they need to, should they want to, should there be an escalation in the tensions between the country and you end up in warfare, they're ready to make their move. You can't make a move on cyber activity from a standing start. So positioning themselves on the networks in advance is called a pre-positioning activity. The problem is that pre-positioning can cause network disruption if a nation doesn't really hasn't sophisticated in their capability. And as we said, we can expect some less sophisticated nations to enter into this, unfortunately. And of course, the risk of that is that in doing this pre-positioning activity, they bring down critical national infrastructure networks. And not only does that, of course, cause significant disruption to society in general, but it also can be seen as an escalation in tensions between those nations, and you could end up sort of entering into a warfare situation when actually that wasn't the intention of the two sides. So actually some aspects of this are quite worrying and do need thinking through and thinking about, and really making sure more than ever that you are aware of who's on your networks, that you've got that monitoring in place, and that you're interpreting it really carefully in the threat landscape, in the political landscape that exists. What's really interesting in the cyber power arms race is that if countries do it right, and that's a judgmental statement, I agree, but shouldn't just be about military might or hard power, if you like. I think almost a more appealing view on it is it's about having a strong, growing digital economy which is stable and secure, and a strong cyber economy which underpins that digital economy, creating so many brilliant and varied careers for scientists, engineers, mathematicians, linguists, historians, political scientists. And I think for the Middle East, that kind of view on it is particularly interesting as you push on to diversify your economies out from oil. So what does a nation need to gain cyber advantage? Well, it needs agility, it needs speed, and it needs the right skills. So it's agility to react to the changing requirements of the threat landscape and of digitization, technology changes, and the agility to change your culture, adjust the culture and ways of working so that you can respond quickly. You need that speed of decision making, so speed of the response and recovery to any attack, and speed of deployment of the updates of any new capability that you push out. And of course, above all, you need cyber skills. You need more people with the kind of specific deep cyber skills, but also upskilling more broadly so that we start to lift cyber out of that kind of bits and bytes lines of code, very, very techie world, into a more general understanding of just how important cyber is and the impact it can have, the positive impact that it can have on a country's economy, on its influence overseas. Now, it obviously helps if you have a strong foundation to build upon. With having a strong cyber economy, a good pool of skills in the population, and having government and industry working closely together to ensure they've got that throughput of skilled graduates. It also helps if you have a clear national strategy setting out the vision and the intent to the world and to yourselves, to get commitment behind it, get commitment to build your pool of cyber skills. And of course, with that, having clearly framework which allows everybody across intelligence services, across military, across organisations in the country, commercial organisations, to understand the clear boundaries that they can operate in. So there is an arms race in play. Military and intelligence agencies and by extension critical national infrastructure, CNI, will be operating in a highly contested cyber environment. So how are we going to respond to that? Now, I set out a strategy in this deck for military because I think they have some very specific challenges, and that's what I want to share with you. And that's because cyber power impacts all of us for good and ill, and it's important that that wide, diverse team are part of shaping a nation's strategy and how we respond. So I set out 3 key principles which I think ministries of defence, militaries, need to focus their effort around. So the first is to leverage the interdependencies between offensive and defensive cyber. Now, at present, for a variety of reasons, we keep the two really separate. Actually, they shouldn't be. We need to take advantage of the benefits that can be gained by sharing knowledge, skills, processes between the two within the organisation. Secondly, we need to be secure by design and secure in operation. You can't expect to set requirements based on a threat landscape in month 1 of your programme and then 12 months later for those to be the right requirements. Too much has changed in technology and in the threat landscape, so you've got to be ready to continually ensure that your networks, your assets are secure through its operation, and that's a change in mindset. It's getting used to the idea that change is normal. Change isn't someone made a mistake and got the requirements wrong on day 1. Change is just something you have to respond to. And thirdly, we've got to assume that even with secure by design and even with secure in operation, that you'll still get compromised. For the military, assuming that you don't is like saying they'll never get physical casualties in a military operation, so they won't bother having frontline medics or for first aid training for any of the troops. You just wouldn't do that. So in the same way, you've got to be ready to respond and recover from a cyber attack and practice for that. And you've got to get used to adapting those offensive and defensive tooling really rapidly. So let's dive into that first one around leveraging interdependencies between offensive and defensive cyber. I did some really fascinating research recently on the fungal networks that exist between forest floors. Above the ground, trees appear very separate, distinct, discrete individuals. But below the ground, the entire forest is connected and interdependent through fungal networks across miles and miles of forest. So trees will help each other, support each other. If one tree's sick, the other will push nutrients towards it. And cutting one tree down can often impact many trees, sometimes a long way away. I do think that cyber can learn from this. We need to stop thinking of offensive and defensive, of friendly nation to friendly nation, of army, navy, air, of our different CNI organisations as separate isolated trees. To have that healthy, strong ecosystem, we need to create those linkages, the invisible, far-reaching fungal network that maintains the health of the whole cyber forest. And if I just take as an example offensive and defensive for a minute, look how similar some of those activities actually are. If you think about vulnerability research, so you within CNI will take notice of vulnerability research because you want to know what vulnerabilities might exist on your networks. And being able to dig in and understand that on bits of tech is a very useful activity. From an offensive point of view, so within intelligence agencies and militaries, they do vulnerability research to find potential exploit routes to attack. Now, obviously, you would never reveal what you found as routes to attack to the defensive side. That would render that vulnerability worthless to the intelligence agencies or the military. However, you can share the methodologies underneath. So the tooling that they use, the skills that they have, and move people between teams so that both sides, defensive and offensive, get really good at vulnerability research, no matter what they use it for. If you look at threat intelligence, understanding that is incredibly important for your defensive networks, but it's also, if you think about what's happening within weapon development, the more that we can see what's being done in there and what feeding in the threat intelligence between the two makes you understand more about what your adversaries could be doing and how you want to defend against those. So again, that's an area where we can carefully share information between the two to improve the standing of both groups. If you look at military operations planning, they've got to cover both what happens when they're attacked, how they're going to defend, and also what they might attack out to others. So it's looking at offensive and defensive, both sides of it. You need one methodology, one process, which weaves the two together, but it must cover both sides. Same with training the troops, training people within the military and intelligence agencies, both defensively and offensively, and getting them aware of both sides. So we need to create these widespread connections, a fungal network between the services, departments, allied nations, and we need to really carefully consider what will be advantageous to share and what we simply can't share. And we can formalise some of those linkages through cross-skilling, so deliberately cycling staff between teams, sharing resources across teams, cadence of meetings between teams, sharing methodologies, tooling, tradecraft. My second key principle was about secure by design and secure in operation. So I think we all get that we shouldn't design inherently insecure platforms. But what hasn't yet been fully appreciated, I think, especially within military, is that it's a continual job. You can't design secure platforms, push them out into operation, sit back and relax. Technology just changes too fast for that, and it's something, to be honest, to be conscious of, not just for the military but for all organisations, just to make sure that you are evolving your defensive capabilities continually. If you're not, you're probably not as secure as you should be. we've got to do the basics right. So you've got to have the secure architectures, the patterns, the standards across all areas. So for military, we'll be talking about their fixed networks, their mobile, and their autonomous platforms. None of them get a free pass. You've got to be secure across all of them. And if you're not in military, then think about your head office versus your satellite offices or your manufacturing, refining plants, your staff that work from home, your mobile phones, your laptops, as well as your fixed infrastructure of your cloud or your physical data centers and servers. Looking right across it and saying, have I got good security across all of that estate, or am I actually weak in certain areas? We've got to assess vulnerabilities regularly on all the technologies and be able to deploy the required mitigations rapidly. It might be patching, just so getting that rhythm of regular patching in place right across the board. But to do it meaningfully, you've got to have a good understanding what's critical and what's not at any point in time, so that for the critical things, you're really pushing out those updates very fast. We've got to leverage threat intelligence in the design of the architectures, the patterns and the standards, as well as in operations that are run. And it's easy for me to say that. It's important we recognise it's really hard to do, though, because it means really understanding all of the workflows of who needs what information to make what decision and to take what action. So you've got to get quite far down in the weeds and think about the different paths of decisions and the different people involved and how they work together, so that the whole machine of cyber defence works together really well. Real-time monitoring and, of course, the ability to rapidly respond. So it's no good watching it but not responding to it across the board. And for military, that's a particularly difficult challenge. So on a fixed network, you can have a security operations center, and you can be pulling information off that network and monitoring it to see what attacks are happening. You can do that pretty easily with your laptops and mobile phones. When they sync back in, you quickly pull the data back, and they're generally syncing back in every night, and you're pulling the information. You're not often offline for very long. That's really hard, though, for the military when they're out there in the field with significant platforms. You can't stick a security operations center in the back of a fighter jet or on a drone, and it's not easy to pull back information across often low bandwidth areas. So it's thinking about what technologies we can bring to bear, and I think artificial intelligence and the automation that can bring is a particularly exciting area for the military to be using. I talked about the fact that military operation planning needs to include the offensive and defensive cyber. It needs to include cyber as a whole. So at the moment, it's not always included in military operation planning. And if you think about the likelihood of being attacked from cyber point of view, when you're on a training mission on your own soil to when you're on a live mission in or near an adversary, they're very different. You're obviously far more likely to get attacked if you're on a live mission. And almost as important as that is that the critical systems on your platforms are going to change between on a live mission and training mission. So it's quite possible that your weapon systems, for example, on your fighter jet are not critical on a training mission. It might be your navigation systems and your comm systems. Pretty sure they're going to be important on a mission and critical to you. So the understanding the criticality of the different components within the systems and understanding the capability of the adversary up against and what they're likely to do, whether you're in a training mission or a live mission, is extremely important to bring into that operations planning. And for training our troops, cyber needs to become part of that training as cyber becomes part of warfare along with land, sea and air. We need to train them how to defend, respond and recover, as well as how to attack. And we talked about the speed at which technology changes and the threat landscape changes. We're not going to be able to develop those cyber offences and defences and then just leave them in the field. It's not like a gun or some bullets where I can leave them in a storeroom and they'll checking every now and again, and they'll pretty much be all right. Cyber does not work like that. We will need to feed and water that cyber capability with monthly updates to maintain their effectiveness. And so that means you really need an established, stable set of development teams who understand the platforms, understands the capabilities, whether it's defensive or offensive, and continually maintain it. And are very responsive. So using agile development processes to constantly reprioritize what they're working on and what they're updating. So we talked about leveraging those interdependencies between offensive and defensive cyber, and we talked about the need to be secure in design and secure in operation. But we've got to accept that even when you've done all of that, you're going to get hit with cyber attacks. And so it becomes about our ability to operate in C&I terms. It's our ability to recover quickly from that and carry on. Just the same in military, it's that resilience to the attacks. And that means that those response plans just need to be worked up and practiced all the time and updated all the time so that we're ready to handle whatever comes at us really well and really fast and keep ourselves up and running. We've therefore got to be able to throw those new urgent requirements at those development teams that I talked about previously and get them to prioritize fixes. But we need a degree of resilience in the field, even without those development teams sort of back at home, to be able to cope with changes and have a few different routes we can go down to recover. So if it's a drone, for example, that gets attacked, have a come home function that brings it back no matter what's coming at it. We need to think more generally about who makes the decisions. So the military in particular has traditional hierarchical models of decision making, and that's going to cause problems for cyber because you haven't got that depth of knowledge across all ranks of cyber. It's still quite a technical area. So they need to think about how to give more delegation to technical experts so that the decisions get made in the right places with the right information for the ultimate success of the mission. That will be quite a hard cultural change to think around, but it's an important one. I thought I'd emphasize the nature of that step change that the military is experiencing here. So if you think about them building a new platform, a plane or an aircraft carrier or something, it takes about 10 years to gather the requirements, to build it, to test it, and to deploy it. We do not have that luxury in the world of cyber for defences or offences. If you took 10 years, you would have built something that was fit for a museum only. So we've got to have a much higher pace of building the new capabilities and also updating what's out there. In a physical sense, they can take years. For cyber, fast or rapid means hours, might mean months, but it never means years. And there's an interesting knock-on effect to the culture and the shift in procurement behaviour that's needed, because they're not going to be able to set out in the way that they do with physical things all the requirements up front, clearly in advance, in a heck of a lot of detail. They're going to need to describe the outcome that they want to achieve and then let the suppliers deliver to that outcome and give them flexibility in the requirements underneath. So I've set out a strategy for how nations can win in a cyber arms race. I thought it'd be useful to finish back, though, with a summary of the common current state and what the desired future state would be. I know I focused on militaries a bit, but I actually think that many organisations can kind of look at this and see some pertinent points. Because as I said before, cyber power is not something that can be achieved for a nation by one organisation alone. It's not something that just sits in military or just sits in intelligence. It's the collaboration and support of the whole cyber economy and the population in general. So at the minute, there's a tendency for cyber defences to be relatively static, especially when you're talking about more mobile platforms. But in a highly contested cyber environment in the future, you need those updates to be deployable within hours and more routinely deployable monthly. And you need to develop that culture of continual agile development and deployment, as well as building and adapting capabilities and infrastructure to underpin that. We've got inconsistent platform cyber defences quite commonly. So you'll be strong in your cyber defences in one area of your network or your organisation and a bit weak in another area. That's where attackers will come in. So it's really thinking about how to get those strong cyber defences right across the board, even in the tricky areas of the mobile infrastructure or the autonomous infrastructure that you've got. And it's thinking about how you build and adapt capabilities, infrastructure that you've got to support that change. Currently, there's this culture that cyber is just for techies. But we need to shift to a world where the impact of cyber for good and for bad is widely understood. And that really means trying to get our message out there with conferences like this and embedding that cyber into the training right across the board, especially for military organisations. And it's about creating those linkages that I talked about between organisations. And of course, this conference is a fantastic network for bringing together the women in cyber. The more we do of that, the stronger we'll be as a whole, the stronger ecosystem that we'll have. So it's getting that collaboration broad and deep and maximising the linkages by really thinking hard about what we can share rather than what we're too frightened to share. Of course, we're still trying to upskill a lot of people within military organisations, actually within organisations in general, on bringing in more and more cyber skills and pulling more of the fantastic graduates from our universities into cyber workplace. We need to reach that critical mass of capability across government and across industry. And all of this needs to be supported by policies, processes, procedures to ensure that common understanding of what we're trying to achieve, the clarity of roles, clarity of decision making within organisations, of what happens when an attack occurs. You get that rapid response and really that appropriate empowerment to enable the speed and flexibility that we will require. So thank you so much for listening today. I think that using cyber to achieve economic prosperity, stability, and as a global influence for good is a really powerful and exciting idea. I've always loved working in cyber, and I think that demonstrating just how important the sector is to our future pipeline of talent pouring out of our universities is so important. And I hope you've taken away some thoughts on how the global race for cyber power will impact you and your organisation, and how you can contribute to the debate and be ready for some of the impacts of that cyber arms race, so that together we can achieve good cyber power in which all of our digital economies can flourish. Thank you.